all 5 of them from all 5 sessions up here, so that they can give us a brief overview of what actually happened in those sessions. I know that all of you wanted to be in more than one session at the same time. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible. So this is going to be really valuable for us. So from session number 1, the rapporteur I'm looking for is Ms. Winnie Sangweni. Is that you? Thank you. From session number 2, Mr. Bafana Malaza. He's on his way. Ms. Dimakatsu Piri for session 3. Are you going to come to the front, please? Dr. Malapane for session 4. Thank you. And Mr. Seisman Motlahung. There we go. Thank you very much. So as our rapporteurs make it onto stage, colleagues, I hope that the sessions were impactful and that you had an opportunity to engage with the researchers as well as their research. You know, a lot of time goes into all of that, a lot of time and effort goes into research outputs, and I hope that you were able to engage. So with that, colleagues, I'm going to take a seat once again. I'm going to give the opportunity to each of the rapporteurs from each session to give us key highlights of what happened in that session, what we actually missed, and why we should have been actually in that session. So over to you, Ms. Sangweni.
Good afternoon, everybody in the house. I greet our DG in the absentia and everyone according to the protocols in this house. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to present to you what we discussed in our Cedarwood room where we were having our work session 1. We were discussing about the e-learning, lifelong learning and reskilling of public servants for future of work. The presentation was done by Prof. David Mello from Thabo Mbeki School of Public and International Affairs, UNISA. The paper for presentation, as I've indicated, that it's an e-learning and skills revolving. The research that was conducted by the University of Witwatersrand, the purpose of the project was to conduct the empirical research to identify the change drivers, that is the e-learning and training policy drivers, social economic drivers for the 4th industrial resolution and during the COVID-19. The objective provides the excellence, demand-driven needs and competency-based education and training. The study that was done, it was done through the interviewing of people because they wanted to get their understanding on their conceptualization of e-learning, as well as the policies that are there, how are they being uptaken for the implementation. The e-learning can be utilized as a mediation tool to upskill and reskilling in the public sector. One of the things that we also discussed was also in terms of the challenges that the e-learning does have, especially, and the impact in terms of regarding the public servants. The PSETA has digital literacy that they did about those challenges, and they are aware of those challenges, and they did a study on how to mitigate all those challenges. The suggestion was to move to open access learning. The learning is constructed for the use of the computer that has to be adopted when being delivered through other technology like cell phones. Like we discussed, that some of the trainings that are being done, they are not conducive, or other people cannot be able to do them on their smartphones, so you can only be able to attend or to be part of those e-learnings when you have at least a laptop or other devices. But as we are living in this a new era, we need to understand that anything should be possible at any time for the information, especially, and the e-learning. The understanding on how we validate and we assess the e-learning outcomes, particularly to ensure that the person behind the computer is in fact the learner. We also discussed that sometimes there are those challenges where the person will register for the training, and then only to find that at the end of the day, the person that is undertaking that learning is not the real person that is supposed to be participating. Like it was indicated that one of the speakers also indicated before that it's happened that you will find someone will be doing that specific course and will be charging people to say, because that person has already done it, and then will be doing a business on doing that training for other people. So we need to have a way to identify that the person who is behind that training or behind that computer is exactly the person that is supposed to be undertaking the training. So we also looked at maybe are there any systems that can be put in place in order to mitigate all those fraudulent practices. And then we also identified that UNISA as the one of the institutions that also deals with the distance learning and the online learnings. They have those systems that they use that's got the cameras that can detect or look around the place where the person is taking the is writing the test or is doing that training, to ensure that the person is the person that is responsible or is the right person to do that. So I think on that one, if maybe also the public service can also improve, it goes back to the improvement of our ICT systems. We also had another presentation that was done regarding the South African Public Service Training and Development. The problem statement that was identified is that is to help with public service delivery and growth, fundamental services without difficulties. Training and development must be regarded as the priority. The issues that arises when the staff members are only assigned to training session near the end of the financial year, that pushes the department budget spending. Therefore, the personnel who must undertake those regular trainings as part of their jobs requirement have a problem. As a result, they end up maybe even not attending or attending not relevant trainings, because now they are pushing the targets and they are trying to utilize the budget that is put there for the trainings. Most of departments usually do that, practice, have that practice of pushing people to take those trainings. Sometimes they don't even look at the training needs, or how is it gonna impact on the performance, or how is it gonna improve the performance of that particular individuals. People will be just given the mandate or the instruction to say, just go and do this training, and at the end of the day, it doesn't provide any impact back to the organization. The recommendations was that the HRD should conduct a thorough evaluations of the training institutions and curriculum provided to make sure that it fills the skills gap that are found in that particular organization. The providers as well must be well versed with government practices. The beneficiaries of the training programs performance are also evaluated in order to improve program administration. Those were the recommendations in terms of how do we make sure that we improve on the training and the development of the employees in the public service. That was our conclusion, to say we must make sure that all the trainings are aligned to the performance of that particular individuals. Thank you.
Thank you to Ms. Sangweni, and as well as the first breakaway session, that was group 1. Thank you. It does sound like we did indeed miss quite a fruitful session there. I would like to just further appeal to the rest of our rapporteurs to please keep the wrap up to roughly 5 minutes max. The next rapporteur that I will be handing over to is Mr. Bafana Malaza, who was in session number 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Afternoon, colleagues. My name is Bafana Malaza from DPSA. Afternoon, TG. Protocol observed. Colleagues, from session 2, our topic was training for enhanced performance and capacity to the state. We had 2 presenters. One was Ms. Mhlauli. She presented on enhancing public sector performance through effective training and development. We touch on few points on this topic. Firstly, it was what is an effective training? The one that gives learners or employees new knowledge, new skills. It also allows learners to apply what they learn during that training. The characteristics of the effective training: one need to bear in mind that we need to have a need assessment that should be done. The content should also talk to the needs. Also, we need to demonstrate the skills and the understanding of the content, which should be a facilitator. Also, there was a concern or a suggestion that HRD need to understand the importance of continuous training in an organization. Training should be aligned with the needs of an employee. Also, the department need to adapt to the new trends by consulting with the professional bodies, interact with the public service through applied research. The second presenter, which was Dr. Naika, the program director, she presented on the implementation of the compulsory induction program, the CIP, is known as CIP, on the socialization of newly appointed public servant. There were a few points that we also touched on it. Firstly, we touched on the socialization of a new entrance to the public servant, compulsory induction program, level 1 to 12, excluding SMS, and also how the CIP, which is a compulsory induction program, prepare the new entrants to execute their mandate as newly appointed public servant. And the anticipatory socialization, what are the impacts on the perception created by social media, by different perception then? Also, there were suggestions that a new program need to be developed to induct a public servant. I mean, the public at large. Also, there was a suggestion that a training need not to be an issue of compliance. Individual need to be willing to attend or to go and develop or train him or herself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Malaza. As he was passing me, he said, I was less than 5 minutes. I think you were. So that brings us to Rapporteur 3, who is Ms. Demakatso Phiri.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Demakatso Phiri from Productivity SA. The groups that I was in, there were two presenters, and the first presenter, Mr. Thabo Sol, mainly touched on the subject of performance management. I soon discovered is the most contagious subject. One presenter even said it's more hated than ESCOM. The people in my group were very passionate. It took a lot to hold them back. This just proves how qualitative and subjective the subject is, and a lot of emotions were up. But however, the study looked into the way performance management was done in municipalities, and they reviewed the issues on resource allocation, and they said what recommended there is that there should be a proper fit or a good fit that is aligned to developmental priorities. The performance development plans should always be reviewed, they recommended. They also said that the recommendations of the Audit General were not quite favorable. However, they are not always followed up with a clear action plan to make sure that there are corrections being done. what came out of that study is that it operated, the municipalities operate under a very politicized environment. It is very toxic. Not many competent people are appointed. And because of the toxic environment that is highly politicized, competent people, if they are appointed, they tend to leave very quickly because they are frustrated by the lack of professionalism that's taking place in that environment. Also, what came up out of the study is that performance management is not exactly aligned to the developmental priorities. It's not objective, it's not transparent, and it's not liked. What they propose should happen, which are points that came from the floor, is that it should be transparent, meaning that there should be a transparent recruitment process. There should be governance and compliance to legal and ethical standards. They also say that the norms and standards must be very clear and succinct. They also recommend that when a political head is changed, it doesn't necessarily mean the PM and the rest of them have to change. They just have to keep to the plan and the mechanisms put in place. That's what came out of the first presentation. And the second presentation was very correlated with the first one, because it looked into what does an efficient and effective performance management system look like. And they discovered that the performance agreement have to be very objective too and aligned to the strategic objectives. They said that generally the rules are very clear in terms of how performance management is supposed to happen. However, the perceptions are a problem in the sense that what actually happens is not what is in the system or what's agreed in the system. Procedures are not followed. If followed, they're not very transparent. The rules and regulations and control measures are inconsistently applied, depending on favoritism. So there's a whole lot of bias that was picked up. And then again, the general welfare of society is not taken into consideration, meaning that sometimes you find that people get performance bonuses and increases, but the service delivery and the society are not happy. So there's an incongruence between the performance rating that the internal staff receives versus the service delivery. So there was recommendation that we need to review at where we ascribe value when you do performance management. If the general public who are the beneficiaries of the service delivery are not happy, why are we getting bonuses? Somebody even recommended that if, for instance, the water leakages in the public in the public or in society, then the entire system must not get a performance bonus. Actually, they should be fired. So there was a lot of recommendation on holding people accountable and consequent management. Basically, responding to the research question, is performance management efficient and effective? The answer was no, it's not valued. There is no compliance and there is no accountability. The recommendations going forward on how you improve on them that came from the room, they recommended that there should be training on communication, problem solving, and conflict resolution to manage the system more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Piri. I think we missed quite a controversial session there. Sounds like a good one. That takes us to sessions 4 and 5. Dr. Malapane is going to do 4 for us. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Program Director. As I introduced my name, I'm Dr. Anthony Tshwarelo Malapane. I'm from the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. also a budding academic, married to some certain various institutions such as TUT and Prof. Mkonza here. And I also assist at the Vet School of Governance. On our session with Section 4, which I was hijacked to be a reporter by Prof. Makamo, who was the program director, we had two presenters. The two presenters had some interesting presentations. The first one, which I will start with it, which was a contentious one, it was presented by Paul Metz. He was, however, rushing to catch a flight. So I'll just touch on it because he's not here to respond to these controversies that he might have presented. The topic is on religious considerations for a sunset clause for BBBEE. He presented on recent arguments and which are pro and contrary to the BBBEE, looking at political, economic, and social. What he did is that he said politically and socially there are contentions. However, economically we do agree that there are certain benefits in terms of BBBEE. And then in terms of the religious context, he did mention that since a majority were Christian, which is around 81%, it means some of the views that we hold within this room are the same on other issues. So he was trying to convince us that if the Bible rejects BEE, it means we can to have to reject it. And then he did present about the development of religious argument in terms of, in relation to his topic, in which he moved from Old Testament to the New Testament, arguing that the Jews and Christians have been agreeing on one thing, that there is God, even though they may not use the same, name or what to be calling him God. And then he did indicate that the New Testament alludes or emphasizes the issue of love thy neighbor, which is central to his argument. And then he also presented on the procurement scenario in question, in which he mentioned the issue of faith versus what is required. And various questions that he raised, which needed us to debate on, it was mainly on whether government is refusing or blocking how neighbors should treat each other or serve each other based on the introduction of the tendering system. And then he also mentioned that it is important that as neighbors we share talent. And then in terms of questions that were raised by the audience, one of the audience raised that understanding of the sunset clauses and the question of saving thy neighbor needed to be interrogated further. And then in terms of bringing tender to the biblical scriptures, one of the audience said there are contradictions, as the Bible alludes that you should give without expecting something in return. And the question of, and therefore, despite bringing the Bible within the context of BBBEE, the question of equality or addressing the imbalances of the past cannot be easily discarded. These were some of the arguments that were raised by several audience members. Using a Bible again to further oppress the previously marginalized, it's like now we're going back where all these things started. Then in responding while he was rushing for his plane, he did indicate that he needed to study further the sunset clauses, and then he's not proposing that SA should get rid of BBBEE. However, he's open to be convinced, and then he did indicate that offering talent should be the main thing, even though he does believe that there should be paid work. Then help the poor, help the needy. And then the second presenter looked at senior managers' perceptions of executive development in Eastern Cape Department of Education, Ms. Nozi Mutebele from Vet School of Governance. And then in her introduction, she did define human capital in terms of competencies, skills, as well as knowledge, and further defined executive training, in which she looked at SMS, which is Senior Management Service, needs addressing through addressing increasing capabilities, efficiency, and effectiveness of competencies. And then she did say these emphasize the need for continuous training, And then going forward, she did indicate that the problem that she was investigating in a study, which was based on her master's study, she was investigating poor performance, emphasizing on systematic inefficiencies in the Department of Education in Eastern Cape. And then she emphasized issues of training and development, which are necessitated by changes in the workplace as well as technological advancement. And then going forward, she did indicate that there is a need to present opportunities and aligning skills and the training needs. And then on her results, she emphasized the issue for continuous training, which is compelled by demand in most cases, such as changes in workplace, technological advancement. And then questions from the audience, I think most of the points that were raised by the audience were mainly advices as well as comments, mainly have to do with one audience member, which I don't see here, and member of parliament, which he argued that, oh, yeah, he is. And then he argued that, you know, there are pockets of excellence in Eastern Cape. So we should not only look at the bad that is happening or what is portrayed within the media. He mentioned issues such as Kura. He mentioned issues such as automotive, such as tourism, that we need to study further. Then this was a very interesting study. This is something that was raised by one of the audience member, that studies of this nature should not be left within the shelf. That means we must find a way on making sure that our research make an impact within government in terms of influencing policies as well as strategies. And then one argued that perhaps continuous training is not a panacea. What about the environment? What about the recruitment that we are doing? And then, but it's true, so I'm even tempted to emphasize. Though one audience member also raised an issue of perhaps the issue of job security as well as retention within senior management services is the one that is failing us more than the training that may be needed. Because in most cases, what we've realized, as I was speaking in the Gauteng legislature doing oversight over departments, we have realized that once senior managers, they serve 3 years, and then they realize that I'm left with 2 years, they start marketing so that they can get a new job somewhere. Because it's like that career in senior management is like that one of a politician. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. That was session 4. And now over to our last session, Mr. Seisman Motlahong.
Good afternoon. Our focus in session 5 was about human resource management for enhanced state capacity. And there we had 2 presentations, and one by Tebogo Mutlani and Valerie Lowe was focusing on the customer complaints management policy in the Free State. And they make a reference to the former President Jacob Zuma's hotline. You can call in and submit your query where it matters. Now they are analyzing in the Free State specific customer services, how perceptions and customer experiences are in terms of submitting their queries there. And one of their findings was that the customer complaints management policy is not visible. So you have these centers, but you don't have a clearly detailed process on how to operate them and how they should function, what kind of outcomes there are, and the turnaround times to these queries. What they speak of is still the aspect of lack of capacity, lack of systems where you should be communicating the complaints. And one of the things that she included was, I think, the aspect of digitalization, how you could modernize customer complaint centers. This was mainly a short presentation. And the one that elicited much interest was by Dr. Ngubela, and it was more about building a capable state through proper human resources. And one of the aspects that he highlighted was this issue of political interference. And he says the problem is that in administration you have an official who is politically junior to somebody who reports to them. But 4 o'clock, after 4, when they go to the community, now it's more like you are faced with these people who would be giving you mandates. And the question that came related to this was, we hear you always talking about political interference, but we don't hear you talking about solutions to overcome political interference. And one of the comments that related to this from another member in the audience was that there has to be an amendment and reforms in terms of law, particularly the PFMA, where it exonerates the political heads and it only punishes the signatory. So he is saying, you hear politicians saying, what did I do? Where did I sign? You can't hold me accountable. Now he says the law should, to some extent, bring these politicians to account. So you basically transform the law. And then the aspect is that politicians should be held accountable for service failures. The other aspect is talent management and the aging or sick personnel. And the argument that he's making is that the old should be mentoring and equipping the young. If you have somebody in your office, don't send them to buy coffee, buy magwenya, make copies there. Give them substantial tasks. Test them. And in this process of testing them, you're actually equipping them and empowering them. This is what needs to be done. And there was also another aspect of entitlement in the workplace that has to come with the aspect of talent management, whereby you have to know if you are to retain a particular person based on their skills, ensure that you don't lose them to the market. And here I would admit somewhere there, the discussion about talent management really flew over my head, and the contents around it I could not capture well. Then the big argument was on centralization and how centralization hinders a capable developmental state. Here we touch on issues of tenders, how you allow provinces to procure to a certain cap, what limitations there could be. And his argument is that because of centralization, you even find certain ward councillors who are ignorant that in their ward there is an EPWP activity happening there. So you have to really decentralize your administration and decision making to allow a greater involvement. And also he spoke about more of a public participation in these processes. On that part of public participation, he spoke about HR solutions that resonate to social ills. How do we solve social ills, and also speak to aspect of a mental or a civic culture reform or mental shifts that have to take place, in a sense that we should not perceive people who work in municipalities or in the public sector as alienated from the political realities in their communities. So as an HR person or processes, we have to see how we can increase public participation in the process. He speaks to this thing of a soul searching of the country along this aspect. The last part in this process was touching also on centralization. His argument was government works in clusters, and this, because of the cluster system, he calls it, it will remain a pie in the sky, because there are certain deficiencies in this. you are not able to hold clusters accountable. And those who participate in clusters selfishly guard their budgets. Therefore, there has to be some reform. Even after discussion, one of the audience members interacted further with him to argue that during Thabo Mbeki's tenure, you had this program of action, government program of action that was transparent, and you could monitor performance and hold accountable the departments and the ministers. But clusters, he argues that clusters is where departments are hiding. There's no accountability. And the argument is to eradicate this foreign concept. It is something that was important from Ireland, he argued. So remove clusters and have us be in a performance-based system. Even if there should be interventions, there should be interventions that are performance-based. And you fund clusters. If you retain clusters, you should fund them based on those initiatives that are performance-based. For us, that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our rapporteurs. I wish I were handing out gifts for the speediest presentation. We definitely have some contenders. So thank you so much to our rapporteurs. We appreciate the essence that you've captured of from all of the sessions, and I'm sure that the delegates here would agree that it feels as though we were actually in those sessions as well. So thank you so much. Colleagues, we've come towards the end of the day, towards the end of the session, but we cannot forget that we have not actually addressed your questions coming from or following the 4 sessions that we had before lunch. Those were chaired, the 4 sessions that 4 presentations rather that I'm speaking of were by DG Makasi. We had productivity essay, we had Wits Real, and then we had the last presentation by Nico and Tim in terms of the HR implications for the findings of the Commission into state capture. I'd like to get an indication from you colleagues with regard to those presentations. What are some of the questions that you may have? Are there any questions that you would like to pose to the presenters? The ones that are leaving. No, not them. I'm talking about the 4, the 4 presentations, DG. Mr. Perumal, yes. I've called out your name, but nonetheless, could you please stand, tell us where you're from and who your question is possibly directed to?
Thank you, Program Director and colleagues. My name is Kevin Perumal. I'm from the Department of Public Service and Administration. And, whilst those presentations were being made, there were some thoughts that were running in my head. And I'm hoping that individuals that were making those presentations are still available to provide some insight. On the productivity presentation, my interest was more on the impact of the developmental state agenda or the transformation agenda of government and how this impacts productivity in the South African context. And the rationale for that is, I was trying to also, when the presenter was presenting, get a sense of why those particular benchmarks were chosen, especially on the European Union or the UK examples and going into the Scandinavian approaches, etc. And the reason for my wanting understanding there is because some time ago, I think it was around 2018, I had a chance to look at the DPSA productivity model. It was a directive on productivity that was put out. And in analyzing that, I also found some gaps and that was based on a benchmark that I had used from the East, and that was the Japanese holistic model. And in line with the sustainability concepts that we are looking at promoting, you know, the SDGs and saving the earth and the triple bottom line in terms of integrated reporting, etc. That particular model made a lot of sense because it had then elements that impacted areas of productivity to start considering, you know, the when we do products or services, the impact that we have on the planet, the issue of using non-biodegradable aspects and the after effects of that on the planet, and as well as the changing climatic conditions. But the other aspect was on the people side of things. You know, in achieving the kind of desired productivity, the kinds of impacts on the people, you know, in terms of that balance or the work life or the livelihoods of those individuals, and cases in points where, if I can use the construction environment, where a lot of casual labor is utilized in the production. And we see that there's a lot of development in that area, but these workers do get injured. There's a lack of safety in some areas, etc. And then they become the social burden of society once that happens, you know. So from a sustainability perspective, the kinds of impact when we look at productivity, you know, in isolation of these other elements, you know. So when we look at countries for benchmarking as well, my concern was, what are the areas of similarity that give rise to the kinds of productivity that they have? And, you know, when I look at the considerations of a country like South Africa, you know, and some of the aspects, I think Anne spoke about RDP, you know, and what we're trying to achieve from a social justice perspective, etc., also comes to the fore there. So I was hoping that the presenter can actually give some insight there. I know there was another presentation later on the public service skills demand and supply systems. It was Mr. Tim that did give us some insights there, supported by, I think, ADDG and UCO. And, you know, given the complex, I think there was a degree of that also discussed with the presenter from, or co-presenting with Anne McLennan on that subject area, where they had also given an idea of the complex human resource development strategy process. And I think there were other agencies that were being mooted to form part of integrated planning, and DPME was one of them. But what I could not find is, on a more finite level, the contribution of a crucial process, and that is job analysis. And job analysis leading to things like job description formulations that then articulate for us from a perspective of competencies, the proficiency levels that are required to be displayed at different job levels, etc., that give effect to the kinds of organizational competencies. So for me, I was trying to understand that, you know, with the kinds of skills, or critical skills list that they did provide there, what was the feeder that led to that? How did you come to those kinds of conclusions? Because in some of the research that we have been undertaking, and as practitioners in the field, we're finding these challenges, you know, which makes the determination of skills very difficult. And without certain practices being there to support us, It's going to be virtually, trying to grasp at straws. So from that sense, I wanted to get the presenter to give us the insights. Was there that level of analysis,
Yeah.
So yeah, those were just the two aspects, and I think with the other presentations, I wanted to get a sense of how the practice of what we term modern workplace learning fits in.
Okay.
Where the principle of self-directed or utagogy comes in. And the implications of this on structures like that of the CETA system, the QCTO, etc.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peramal. I think there were three areas that you identified there, and possibly even three presenters that you targeted here. But I think I should have prefaced this entire Q&A by saying, first of all, unfortunately, the Vitzreal team has left, and they are not in a position, therefore, to answer any of your questions. I'm not sure if our presenter from Productivity SA, Ms. Kabutse, is still around. No, it doesn't look like it. So, colleagues, if you have any further questions, and taking into consideration we have 5 minutes left until we wrap up for today, I think they should be directed at the presentation by DG Makasi and the presentation by Mr. Mabunda and Mr. Tim. Those are the two presenters who are available to answer. So please bear that in mind. Are there any further questions in that regard? Yes, sir. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, actually, he had the mic first. My apologies, sir. We'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairperson, and apology accepted.
Thank you.
Peter Moholo from Northwest Office of the Premier. Chair, my question, I'm not sure exactly to which speaker is it directed to, but probably to the entire House. It is relating to this question of the requirements of no experience to the entry-level jobs that was presented by the President last year, and even this year it was reiterated in the SONA, and this morning again it was made mention of during the plenary. And the question says that how will you go about achieving that particular goal in the event where you, for instance, advertise the position of one person and you get 1,000 respondents who all of them do not have experience? How will you go about doing the selection? If we can assist us about that, we'll greatly appreciate.
Okay.
I know in our province we've got around approximately 3,000 entry-level positions across the provincial departments. We were thinking of either making one panel and recruiting all of the people in these vacancies. But the question is, what yardstick are you going to use so that you can come to a selection decision? Thanks.
Lovely. I'm sure we've got two speakers left. I'm sure either one of them or even both are going to tackle it. So let's take our last question for the day. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Program Director. I just wanted to mention or to respond to the presentation by Productivity South Africa, but however, it is not actually to her. I'm aware that she's not here, but I was actually going to be focusing my attention to the DDG. Nico will be able to deal with it because it's a proposal or suggestion to the department. And when she was there, she actually gave me the impression